Good afternoon or good evening. It's after 5 p.m. On behalf of Virginia Board for People with Disabilities and our Executive Director, Terry Morgan, we would like to welcome you to the Alumni Development Program, Training Alumni's seventh, yes, seventh continuing education workshop. We began this series of workshops in 2024, August of 2024, and we shall conclude in April of 2025. Tonight is the seventh session entitled Navigating Justice, Part 2, Safeguarding People with Intellectual, Developmental Disabilities, and Invisible Disabilities. The Alumni Development Program is comprised of training alumni. The training alumni are graduates of one of our two flagship training programs, either the Partners in Policy Making Training Program, affectionately termed or called PIP, and or graduates of our Youth Leadership Forum, Youth Leadership Academy, formerly known as the Youth Leadership Forum. So we have graduates from the Youth Leadership Forum and the Youth Leadership Academy. And together, PIP graduates and Youth Leadership Forum or Youth Leadership Academy make up the training alumni. And the purpose or the mission of the training alumni is to provide advocacy trainings and continuing education workshops that are focused on the broader disability community in the Commonwealth of Virginia. In order for us to deliver these very provocative, educational, inspiring, and exciting sessions, it takes a village. And so we honor and acknowledge our Executive Director, Terry Morgan, for her leadership, the members of our administration team within Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, Mr. Henry Street, and Ms. Tara Bethay, who is the board administrative specialist, and Henry serves as the director. Our communications team is managed by our communications and information manager, Ms. Anita Ayers, and her staff member, Ms. Brittany Hughes, serves as the communication assistant. Ms. Jamie Pellegrino joins us as our closed captioner tonight from Virginia Relay, and as always, we welcome her as a part of our communications team. Representing Boyd Knott Visual Communications, also known as BBC, is Mr. Eli Red, who serves as our technology guru or our technician support. We work very closely with DAR's procurement team in order to process all types of procurement vouchers and payments, etc. And we welcome tonight the team that will serve as our ASL interpreters, Ms. Sherry Parsons and Ms. Carrie Humphrey. In order for us to find out how we are doing, what our participants think, what suggestions or recommendations are needed for future sessions, our director, Ms. Nia Harrison, Director of Planning, Research and Evaluation, Nia Harrison, handles all of our evaluations for all of our training and alumni development programs. And of course, the hardest working team in showbiz is Ms. Kelly Vanella, who serves as the YLA and PIP coordinator, and Ms. Christine Jeremiah, who serves as the training and the alumni development programs coordinator. And of course, yours truly provides leadership. We need to hear from you. And so already on the screen has been a Zoom poll. The first poll that you received tonight is called About You. And we launched the poll simply to find out and to understand who is here, who has joined us for this particular session. At the end of the session, right as we are about to close 10 minutes or so prior to, the second poll will show up. It is our session feedback, where we are wanting to ascertain from you any feedback that you would like to give us about this session and any suggestions or recommendations for how we can do better in the future. If there are requests for alternative formats, we ask that you drop it in the chat, or you can email Nia Harrison at Virginia Board, and that email is listed there. Tonight, we are going to turn it over momentarily to our team of presenters. Navigating Justice Part 2, Safeguarding with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and Invisible Disabilities. Our 4 presenters come as a team. They are dynamic. They're backed by popular demand. And following them, we will have a question and answer. If the presenters would like to entertain questions, if you would like to put your questions in the chat and they are reading questions and wanting to answer in real time, then that is their choice. But we do have a designated question and answer period after the presenters have completed. And then again, we will put up the session feedback poll, while at the same time I will share some final comments or announcements with you, and then we shall conclude. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce members of our team. Ms. Catherine Childers is one of our training alumni leaders. Catherine is a graduate of the class of 2016 Partners in Policymaking Training Program. Happens to be the very first class that I delivered on behalf of Virginia Board 10 years ago. And so we welcome Catherine Childers to the room tonight as a presenter. Dr. Nikki Dowd, also a training alumni leader, and she is a graduate of Partners in Policy Making, the class of 2020. Both Catherine and Dr. Dowd have been major players in the Alumni Development Program and has provided leadership for the training alumni. We also have the renowned Mr. Brian Kelmar, who is the president and co-founder of Decriminalize Developmental Disabilities, D3. And we have Ms. Amy Trail, representing FACES, who is an educational advocate and consultant. I now present to you Ms. Catherine Childers, and I will turn it over and yield to Catherine.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I can't believe it's been 10 years since I did PIP. But anyway, I'm excited to be with you tonight. This is a subject that Nikki and I are very passionate about. We've certainly had different paths along the way. I have a child with multiple disabilities, and during my advocacy and education along the way, I figured out that I needed to educate myself and protect my child from possible bumps in the road with the justice system. And she was pretty young at the time, but we were starting to see aggressive behaviors. And I had come across some other cases where folks had pursued legal action against children, because if you look at the definition of what assault and battery is, you can see how easy it would be to be charged with something like that. So that sort of led me to contact Miss Amy Trail, and she has worked with us to get some things in place. And it's something that those of us with children who have some disabilities need to be aware of and look out for. So I want to have Nikki tell you a couple of things, because her path has been a little bit different, and her child is a little bit older than mine, and so she has encountered some experiences already. And we want to give you guys some ideas about things that you can do, maybe not just for your own child, but in the community at large. And I'm going to turn it over to Nikki.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I hope you all can hear me okay. And Catherine, yes, our paths are a little different, but I'm glad it brought us together. So, it has really just been a pleasure and just an honor to just serve alongside you on this path. So I know we're talking about navigating justice, that prison to pipeline that seems like it's been set up for so many of our young adults. And what brings me here is my experience and my efforts to avoid that pipeline and look for pathways to support and intervention, just making sure I'm doing my part to put safeguards in place for my son, for him to be successful. As Catherine said, my son is a little older. He is on the spectrum. He's about 24 years old. But during my son's sophomore and junior years, he struggled with social cues and understanding those boundaries. He wanted to make friends, and unfortunately, he fell victim to peer pressure. He was educated in the general education setting, and he thought he was making friends with some of his male non-disabled peers. As it turns out, they were daring him to do inappropriate things by offering him money or a laugh. And what ended up happening was that my son would get suspended for those inappropriate behaviors. Now, while he's getting suspended, these young men are, going about their business. Now, this doesn't excuse my son's behavior. I wasn't condoning them, but at the same time, I just wanted to put this in context. So what would end up happening? Okay, my son would get suspended 3 days here, 4 days here, 3 days, and so forth. So I requested an IEP meeting and asked for an MDR, that's a manifestation determination review, just to have his behaviors analyzed so a plan could be put in place. But the administration, the members of his IEP team told me, oh no, his behaviors aren't that bad. But I'm thinking, okay, well, they're bad enough for him to keep getting suspended and eventually arrested by the SRO, and the SRO essentially was the county deputy sheriff, okay? So this deputy sheriff interviewed my son in the assistant principal's office without my prior knowledge or without the presence of his case manager. And so not knowing what to do, I called around to different organizations. So you can imagine just the fear I was having. So I called around to these different organizations in the state, organizations that, are set up to help individuals with disabilities, right? Anyway, many of these organizations turned me away. They told me we can't help you, or we're backed up, or we're not designed to do that kind of work. I called around to, special education attorney. This attorney told me this attorney wouldn't even talk to me unless I paid upfront fees just for a consultation. So you can imagine my dilemma. Eventually, someone directed me to Brian Kilmar. I think it was the Autism Society, the National Autism Society, that directed me to Brian Kilmar, and that was the best decision ever. I cannot stress that enough. Brian walked me through exactly what I needed to do. I felt like he was there every step of the way. I mean, just on the phone, just available for me. He kept reminding me that I am my son's biggest advocate. That became my mantra, right? And I was just so passionate, and just from Brian's guidance, I knew I needed to fight for my son's rights, and I refused to let him become another statistic on that prison to pipeline pathway. Brian told me about this bill he wrote, SB 133, deferred disposition. And I know he'll talk more about that. But he encouraged me to meet with my state representatives to get backing for that bill. He also encouraged me to share information about the bill with my attorney. And I did. I followed Brian's advice. I mean, I can't tell you enough. That fight was hard. It was emotionally and mentally draining. Okay, but just through prayer and just being strategic, And following Brian's advice, my son's case was dismissed and his record was expunged. I'm gonna tell you about Brian, just the type of person he is. You know, he, again, on the phone with me, didn't charge me a dime, and he's just making sure that I'm understanding, you know, what I need to do and just stressing. And I was grabbing anything I could think of while he was talking just to make sure I was taking notes. I think I was writing notes on the back of an envelope because I didn't want to miss anything he had to say. So, you know, I told Brian I was indebted to him. Again, this man took the time to walk me through what I needed to do and did not request one dime. Again, however, you know, we have some of these agencies, again, that are designed to help individuals with disabilities, but again, they did not help me. So in summary, and I, you know, want to make sure that we have enough time for Brian and Amy, but in summary, I identified the support I needed, and you'll see through this slide here just what I did to navigate this path for support. So I educated myself by just getting involved. As Dr. Penny shared, I'm a graduate of the Partners in Policymaking cohort. And through that program, I learned so much. One of the many things that I carry with me is moving from advocating for my son to advocating with my son. Those were one of the tips and strategies I learned through that program. And so by doing that, essentially, you know, I am giving, I gave my son and I continue to give him the tools that he needs so he can navigate this pathway to success. Through PIP and speaking with Brian, I learned how to articulate my expectations to the school to make them understand I know my rights and I know my son's rights, and I received, you know, that he needed to receive those services through his IEP, and that he was entitled to a free and appropriate public education, FAPE, right? As such, these schools needed to know exactly that I expected them to fully collaborate with me and my son. And when they did not, by telling me that they could not provide the service my son needed for his individualized education, I exercised my right to request my son to be transferred to an environment where his individualized needs could be met per idea. So again, you know, I'm throwing out these acronyms because I wanted the administration, the school, to know that I knew my rights now. I've been educated through these programs, through talking to people. I knew my rights. So what eventually ended up happening was that I found a school where my son could thrive, and the school district had to pay that tuition. I was looking for the school to develop a crisis plan, as I said, a crisis management plan, as I said earlier, you know, that MDR, but again, they didn't want to collaborate. So in terms of systemic and policy changes, as I mentioned earlier about SB 133, it was through that law that, you know, I was able, as I said earlier, to work with my son's attorney to get his case dismissed and have his record expunged. So, you know, really and truly, from my experience, it's individuals like Brian, individuals like Amy, like Dr. Penny, and the program she spearheads that I'm able to sit here today, this evening, and provide you with my experience on this pathway, that experience that really resulted in a positive outcome. So now I'm going to turn this over to Brian, who will share a little bit about himself and what he does. And after that, we'll hear from Ms. Trails. So thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, for that intro. It's a lot to live up to, so I hope I can live up to it. I'm going to share my PowerPoint slide here, talk a little bit about what I do and some of the issues that we come across. Just a minute. Can you all see that okay? Yep.
Yes.
I'm Brian Kilmar. I'm the executive director and or president and co-founder of Decriminalize Developmental Disabilities. And the reason I started this organization is because I went through this, and it was very, very painful. My son, who's now 34 years old with autism, got caught up in the criminal justice system as a teenager with another teenager. And it was the most horrific experience. Even though he did not get jail time or any of that, he was on probation for 10 years. He was on the registry for 13 years. And it was just a nightmare every single day. And there's a good news part to that is 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was able to get him a pardon from the governor. People understood this travesty of justice. And 2 years ago, he is the only one ever to be removed from the violent sexual registry. And it's because of people have seen what a travesty of justice this was. And my wife and I went through a lot of pain. And I started sharing my story with others. And I went, oh, I'm not the only one. And then I started partnering with the ARC of the US. And then people started reaching out to us in just small onesies and twosies. And we're now working with over 1,500 people across the US. We also work with Canada, Australia, and the UK. Yeah, we're not a nonprofit. We're hopefully we'll do that within the next few weeks. We're almost there. But one of the things that I found that was just unbelievable in my son's case is that laws don't take into account developmental disabilities. And I still share that today with legislators. They take into account things like mental illness, and they take into account things like drugs or alcohol or veterans types things, but they have not taken in developmental disabilities. And the reason is because I would say probably 95% of the legislators that I talk to, although they're getting better, don't understand the difference between mental illness and developmental disabilities. And I always put this slide or I give them information. I go, look, this is developmental disabilities. This is something you're born with. And people will say, well, you know, you have to be identified before the age of 22. Well, that doesn't mean you have to be, screened prior to that, because I have a lot of people that are 30s, 40s, 50s that haven't been screened because a lot of this hasn't been in the DSM-5 until 2013, and they call it autism spectrum disorder. And it's something, as I explained to a lot of the prosecutors, I go, look, this isn't something they just made up yesterday, and it's not going away tomorrow. This is something they're born with, and this is something they're going to live their entire life. Mental illness, on the other side, is typically it's onset at any age. You can be treated or cured, and that's a big difference. And people talk about mental health programs, and they mix up the terminology and thinking, oh, yeah, we have that covered under mental health. Well, no, they're two separate things. It's like having a foot doctor and a heart doctor, two different specialties and two completely different areas. And this thing I run into in almost, I probably say, I don't know, 75% of the time now, even with parents not even understanding that. So it's an important thing to understand. One of the things that I tell people is this white line here. This is your chronological age, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to whatever. And usually a person with developmental disabilities or autism, usually their developmental, cognitive, and emotional is probably a couple years behind. In other words, if you have like a 19-year-old, they may be like a 15 or 16-year-old. But this is the key part that people don't get, is the social development. Their social development, understanding social norms, like I'm talking with my hands or looking at your face, they're not picking that up. Things that they'll understand between teenagers, how people learn about appropriate behaviors and taboos. Well, they don't have peers, and they don't pick these things up. They miss all those cues. And what they really are is 1/4 of their age. And there's a lot of research that's shown this. So example, if you have a 20-year-old, their social norms, social taboos, understanding is that of a 5-year-old. And it tends to level off unless they have been given appropriate education, because they're not going to pick it up through talking to people or inferring. They can't do that. They're just not wired that way. So that's important that people understand this. And I explain this when we go to courts, and I explain this when we do to legislators, is you're arresting this 20-year-old, but really they have the understanding of a 5-year-old. Would you really put a 5-year-old in jail? And unfortunately, as we'll see a little bit later, and we've heard already, yes, they would put a 5-year-old in jail. And we have one of our speakers is going to may talk about that tonight. So what's happening? These laws were all created with unintended consequences. What happens is they're basically rolling everybody throwing everybody under the bus, and they're not taking into account these issues. One size fits all. You're all the same. You're all bad people. Well, no, they're not. There's things going on because of their disability. And here's an important part for parents to understand, is that a person with autism or developmental disabilities is 7 times more likely to come in contact with the law, but yet they're no more criminal than anybody else. And there's nothing to suggest that they committed a higher rate. So why is that happening? And what is really happening is discrimination, is people are expecting neurotypical behaviors, right? But in the developmental disabilities and people with autism, their brain is wired a little bit different than ours, and they interpret things differently and don't, pick up on a lot of things that you and I could be intuitively thinking and pick up. One of the things I tell a lot of the legislators, I said, look, what you have done is years ago, if you may remember, some of the more mature people on the call, is they used to have mental health, mental institutes. And if you're autistic, and I think they even mentioned that when my son was born, is that we have institutes that we can put people like this disability. And people decided, no, that's a bad thing, which it really was, because the rest of the brain works, right? But they're treating like they're crazy or insane. So they said, okay, we'll get rid of those. And they did. The problem is they went, good, we fixed it. Well, yeah, you fixed it, but you didn't put any supports with that. So now they're out there basically on their own. And what we have ended up doing is using prisons as the mental health institutes. And why is this wrong? Well, one of the laws we'll talk about is something called mens rea. And what that means, did they have the actual criminal intent to do this crime? And the answer is no. Like Nikki's son, or like others, like Nikki's son was, coerced and thinking, oh, this is okay. Yeah, you do that. Yeah, that's the cool thing. Or they don't pick up, that, oh, well, if it's on the internet, that means it's okay, right? Because they wouldn't let it on the internet if it wasn't. No, they don't pick that up. So they don't really have dangerous or intent. And we often call that counterfeit deviance, which means basically they have the inappropriate behaviors, but they're not doing it because they criminally intended, wanted to do that. No, they just didn't comprehend the situation. So what happens? As we said, we lack the visual cues. When we look at somebody's face and go, ooh, they're making a face like, oh, okay, well, the way you're looking at me, I guess I'm getting too close to you, or I'm doing something inappropriate. Back off. They're not going to pick that up. And we talked about social norms and taboos. I think the biggest thing there is, do they really see the forest through the trees? No, they will hyper focus on one area and not get the big picture of how that tree interacts and becomes a forest. They are not picking up and putting the two and two together. And I always said with even my own son, when they ask him, do you understand? And they did this, and this is a thing of, do they really have the comprehension to stand in court? They asked him, do you understand a lawyer? Do you understand a court? Do you understand a judge? Well, yeah, he watches, one of the criminal programs. And was yes. Now you ask him, what exactly does that person do? No clue. That's it. That's as far as they go. So very high level. Other issues that we have which causes incidents is sensory, right? So as we know, it overloads in their brain, smell, noise, textures, new environments, something different. And what happens is their brain is overreacting, is super stimulating. And what happens, just like in your computer, what happens when you have all your programs up and you're trying to look at all the programs? Your computer crashes, right? So does their brain. In my son's case, it stops, and it literally will take him anywhere from, I don't know, 10 seconds to 10 minutes to kind of put it and reboot. And that's what actually happened in his situation. For you and I, that would happen in, a microsecond. So these are things, or what's happening and why these things are happening or going on. I'm going to talk about the laws, but the cases we have worked with, we work, as I mentioned, families all over the United States. Typical cases are internet. So people want, the kids don't get sexual health education. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So where do they learn about that? Well, where do you learn about anything? You Google it. And what happens when you Google it? You're going to go into some inappropriate sites and things will pop up and they'll just precipitate. They're not looking at the images. They're going, oh, this is something they're hyper focused on, and they'll just click on it and not have really understanding what they're clicking on. So that's one. The other thing is, as we mentioned, inappropriate behaviors. I've had anything where a person was doing a getaway because the guy said, hey, just wait here. We're going to run in and we'll be right back and you're going to drive us. And he got caught up in robbery. We've had a case, there's a very famous case right now in Texas where an individual is going to be put to death. And not because he did anything, it's because he has autism. And if you look that up, it's Ryan Roberts. He was on NBC and he was on Dateline and a couple other shows. What happened was he had a child that he was taking custody of, his I believe it is son, it was a baby, and had multiple medical issues. And the child died. He called the police, and the police thought he was acting kind of strange. Like he said, well, I have to eat my sandwich before we go. And at the hospital, they said, oh, he was kind of standoffish. He was kind of weird. And those were the things that actually convicted him. And as we found out later, shaken baby syndrome is junk science. And it turned out his son didn't die from this shaken baby syndrome. He died because he had medical issues, and they proved that later on the autism. But even the police officer that arrested him went, I didn't realize that he had autism, and I thought it was just he was a strange response. So we arrested him, and I testified against him. He's now testifying in trying to get him out. In fact, the Texas judiciary legislature actually held a hearing to hold up his execution. But basically, he's being executed because he's autistic, because he acted strange. Now that's an extreme case, and hopefully none of you ever come into that. But these things are happening to people like you and me that said, I have my son protected, and you think you do. And when it happened to me, I went, you clearly understand he has autism and he really doesn't understand the situation. They went, sorry, we can't do anything about that. And that's when I said, you've got to be kidding me. And that's why I went with legislators and I introduced some legislation. So I'll talk about each one of these bills and why they're important. This one is very important for all the parents out there. It's HB 134. And what that requires is that the Department of Education put out a guide that schools should. Now, unfortunately, in Virginia, it's not required. They can't force anything. Everything is, quote, guidance. But it is there. And as a parent, you can ask your school district, why aren't we doing this? And why isn't it in my IEP? And there's a link to this, and I'll share it with you on this, share the slides with you guys. It's something called Self-Help and Relationship Education. It's called a Share Guide, and it's on the Department of Education website. And what that is, it says that in the IEP, starting in kindergarten through 12, you're going to teach them appropriate sexual health, appropriate behaviors. Like kindergarten, you may just learn, don't go to the bathroom in the playground. And as you get older, you may get, Well, if you get these types of text messages, that's not right. Or sharing pictures of each other, that's not right. And as you get later, maybe you get relationships. No means no, or this is when a person does that, that means to stop and not do anything. I always think that's appropriate for any teenager, but especially for kids with autism, and they should be getting this. And unfortunately, a lot of the school districts are not doing it because they're not aware of it, because parents aren't pushing for it, and because the way the law is written, it's guidance. I may go back to the legislation and push on that. I do talk to the special ed head, and we've had she worked with me actually on this when I was putting in the bill. The next one is an important one also. So that's an important one because what that does, that prevents your child from getting in these situations, inappropriate behaviors, or not understanding situations. My son was fortunate enough to go to Marshall University, which has an autism program, and they would actually sit down with him, which was the best education there of weekly, and they have team meetings. They said, well, I got in this situation and this girl waved to me. Does that mean she likes me? No, and they would train him. No, that's not. It means she's just being nice. Oh, okay. And what they're doing is they're teaching him, okay, what's the appropriate interaction? Should I call her? Should I look her up? Does that mean she want to date me? No. So they learn those types of things. And this is part of what's supposed to be learned in K through 12 here in Virginia. The next one is the Marcus Alert. So the Marcus Alert, and many of you may have heard of 988. So 988 used to be the one that you call for if you're suicidal. Well, now it's more of a mental health crisis call. It's still a lot of work. They're making some improvements, but what it is that suppose your son is having a meltdown, and this has happened, and you as a parent, you don't know what to do, right? Maybe your son's bigger than you, and maybe he's just flailing around, and you just need somebody to help out. So you call 988, and what they're supposed to be doing is trying to de-escalate it, or send a critical response, a mobile crisis response team, or somebody from REACH, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, so that somebody who's trained in autism or developmental disabilities could come and de-escalate the situation. Because as soon as a police officer shows up, we talked about sensory issues, sirens, sounds, a badge, a new person coming over. This exasperates the situation and only escalates it even further. So you need people that are trained. This has gotten under a lot of pressure. We just spoke to them 3 days ago. One of the things when they wrote the Marcus Alert bill, I said, okay, it was established for mental health, but you need one specifically for people with developmental disabilities and autism, because they're completely different from mental health. And what's happening is police were responding, and if somebody's having a breakdown, or what are they going to do? They're there to protect. They're going to try and tackle that person. What happens? Fight or flight. And then what happens? Now they're in the criminal justice system. So you called for help. When I call 911 for help for a heart issue or some other medical issue, I expect somebody's going to take care of me, and somebody's probably going to take me to the hospital. When you call for help in a developmental disability issue, you expect that somebody's going to help you. You don't expect that your son or daughter is going to end up in jail. And this can happen at any time. So what we're pushing on them recently is that we want people trained in autism or developmental disabilities that are experts, that are trained to respond. And like I said, if you have people with mental health experience respond, it's just like, I don't want that foot doctor working on my heart. They may know about a heart, but I don't want them touching my heart, right? Well, the mental health, they may know about autism, but they're not experts in that. In fact, I was talking to a pediatrician today. She says in all those years of experience, we had 4 weeks of training on this. out of, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 years, 4 weeks of training. And she says, we're not experts. We as pediatricians are not experts. So we send people to experts. So experts should be responding. So that one's still in it's law, but they've got a ways to go. And there's a bunch of us pushing back on them very heavily now. They owe us an answer back of how we're going to be part of establishing, making sure that autism response teams. Two other bills that are important is SB 1315. And this one I was going to call named after my son because this is, I actually wrote this one in conjunction with UVA law students. I said, you mean to tell me that we can't bring into account that he has autism and didn't understand the situation unless we do a plea deal or we're found guilty? It was like, yep, we don't care. Can't even bring it into the court. And I went, that's crazy. So we changed the code. So now that can be brought in at the beginning. If you end up where you may go to trial, you're allowed to bring that in and say this should be part of the trial, which was a big deal. The one that Nikki was talking about is SB 133, which is now Virginia code. And I put the code in here instead of SB 133. It's 19.2-303.6. This has been one of our most successful ones. And as it worked with Nikki, I have recently testified in 8 cases where they said, okay, this person's, yes, they did inappropriate. And a lot of times it's assault that we get people caught up in. But they have autism. And what we do is we get a lawyer who is trained in autism, and we have a forensic psychologist who is trained in autism. And they explain the case to the judge. And what they'll get is diversion. And what we have is we have programs to train them in appropriate behaviors, whether it's, okay, training them about assault or training them about sexual type things or whatever it may be. And then they come back. In fact, I just had a lady about an hour ago that called me. Her son, I was in the courtroom and I testified because I wrote these bills, because a lot of times the legislator or the prosecutors go, well, or the judge would say, well, I don't think that's what they meant when they wrote this bill. And the lawyer turns around, well, it just so happens we have the person who wrote the bill here. So, so that shoots them down, which is very helpful. But I have personally testified in 8 cases of this, and all 8 cases received deferred disposition. And the one I just talked to, I got in there, and this judge she was looking for the electric chair for this kid. I mean, fortunately, we don't have the death penalty anymore, but that's the way she was swinging when I came in. And I was like, oh my gosh, we'll be lucky if we get him off, for 20 years. At the end, after I testified and the 2 forensic psychologists testified, she went, give me about 10 minutes. And she came back. And this kid ended up serving, I think he served like 30 days and now is on the deferred disposition, comes back after 5 years, and they will either remove the charge or make it a lower charge. So it's been very helpful in lawyers. The problem with all of these bills is not too many people know about it. And I often find lawyers, as Nikki said, they went, oh, I heard about that. I even had, the first time I testified, the judge said, I'm not familiar with this. And we educated him on that, and he ended up doing the deferred disposition. We're trying to push the same legislation in Maryland right now, and I think we're going to be working on Pennsylvania, but we're trying to roll out these laws across the country. But everything has started here, and it started here because I live here in Richmond, and it's 30 minutes to the Capitol, so I'm able to go down there. And one of the things I will tell you, that you probably have learned in PIP, by the way, my autistic son is a graduate of PIP, is going and talking to your legislators is very important. They actually listen. All of these bills, the education one I wrote, the criminal proceedings I wrote, the deferred disposition was a Senator Stewart who kind of wrote that. And this other one was, this next one I'll talk about, was the Autism Society. But they introduced them, and I tell people, these people that are legislators, they don't think of these laws that just out of thin air and say, well, I think we should do this. They make up laws because you as constituents say, let me tell you my story. And I always tell parents, tell them your story. And Nikki runs one of our groups meetings that we have every month. It's called Wine and Wine. We have a little bit of both, but not too much of either. And parents share their stories with other parents, and it's a safe place, so we support. And that's one of the things of our organization is we work directly with the parents and helping them, like Nikki. So Nikki is not the only one that I have gone through this. All 1,500 people have gone through this. I talked to every single one personally, and they all have my personal phone number, and they can call me at any time. And sometimes I talk them off the ledge, and sometimes I just need guidance. But it's important because I didn't have this when I went through it. And I couldn't believe it. And like Nikki, I went to all these organizations. They went, yeah. No, we don't really get involved in that. And so we couldn't find any organization, so we created one. The last bill I have here is House Bill 1246 and Senate Bill 547. That just went through last year. And that requires that all law enforcement receive training in autism. They've had something what's called crisis intervention team, where they'd had a few officers that were trained in mental health, and a majority of that training was in mental health, and only a smaller portion was that in autism. But now it's specific, although that's not have to be implemented till 2027. So you'll still see. And all of these things, what they're doing and what we're trying to do is take a chip off the mountain of trying to keep our children out of the criminal justice system. So we have another bill we have in this year was that if you call 911 and your child does assault somebody, that you're allowed to do what's called an affirmative defense. And what that is, it's similar to self-defense. It gives your lawyer another tool to say, hold on, they had autism, they were having a reaction, they're not mentally ill, there was something that, their sensory issue escalated, and now it's de-escalated, so we want to get that considered. And all these laws, like I said, are trying to help our children. Advice to parents. And this happens a lot. You're like Nikki, you get a call from the school and it says, your son's been in trouble. He's talking to the law enforcement. At that point, the first thing you should say is stop. I'm not there and I need to be there. And then once you're there, you say, am I being accused of anything? Or am I being charged? And if they said no, you say, well, thank you very much. I hope you have a good day. Goodbye. Never, ever, ever, ever say anything to law enforcement present without a lawyer. And make sure you talk to the lawyer first, because everything you say and can and will be used against you. And unfortunately, what I've had is families have called me and they said, oh, well, we wanted to help and we wanted to show that, we're responsible parents and we want to tell them, we're open and honest and we want to make sure that we get this cleared up. They go, well, what you just told us, we're now arresting your child. So if they ask the student, let's say in a kindergarten, and this has happened, did you hit this little girl? And an autistic or developmental disability is going to say, not going to lie, I said, did I hit the person? Yep. And they could be dragged away right there. And we've had that in handcuffs as young as 5 years old. And this can happen to any of you. So anyway, this is so important, is never speak to them. If you're going to be arrested, just say, I want to exercise my rights, and I want a lawyer present for him. And tell your child, tell them now, even if they're 4 or 5, whatever, never, talk to a police officer if he's asking you questions about a situation. We've had a bill that we put in and it did not go through, is police officers can lie, they can manipulate, they can do all kinds of things, and it's perfectly legal. And unfortunately, with people with autism or developmental disabilities, they are easily manipulated and pleasing, and will want to say, well, this is a law enforcement, so he's telling me that I did this, so yes, I did that. In fact, I always tell parents, if the law enforcement said to your son, did you kill Abraham Lincoln? And the law officer says, we know you did. The individual will say, yes. Well, that's physically impossible, but yes, I did, because they're easily manipulated and want to please. So just be aware of that. These laws that I'm talking about, they apply to children. And there is a bill that passed 2 years ago that basically said, if there is an incident of a quote that requires a law enforcement for an SRO or somebody like that, you must report that and take that into account, and that must be reported, and that kid is going to be arrested. And we said, time out. You need an exception for autism and developmental disabilities, and they put that in. And one of the stories I had is a parent, this law book came into effect 3 years ago on July 1st. On July 2nd, a parent called, or it was a few weeks after that, but on July 2nd, her son was acting up on the bus. And the bus driver called the police. And this kid was about 12 years old. A SWAT team showed up, surrounded the bus, and took the kid off in handcuffs. And we went back, and I told her about this bill, and she went back to the sheriff and said, you do have this bill that protects my son. And he went, I'm so sorry. And there was a big apology, but really, they violated his rights, and they violated the law by taking him away. So know that you have American Disabilities Act applies to your children, which means they have to take into account in any of those situations, even in school, that your son has a disability and making accommodations. Just as if you had a blind child or a child that couldn't hear, there are things that they have to take into account. It's the same for people with autism and developmental disabilities. They have to take that into account. Last thing I always say, if it looks like a legal situation, call me. Email me. There's my email. And if you need Nikki or can always get a hold of me, and I usually hand out my cell. So just be aware this can happen to you, and none of us think it does, and we all think we're protecting our children and can protect them. But it's that few minutes that they're out of your sight, that they're in the basement, or something happens at school, or something happens on the playground, or something happens. We had one that happened in a Chuck E. Cheese, and that was even a more devastating story. It can happen to you, so you need to be aware of what you can do about it.
Brian, did you have your email on a slide?
Yes, it's right there.
I think you need to advance it. It's not up yet.
Oh, is that up?
That's the conclusion.
Right there at the bottom.
Oh, at the bottom, D3.
Right there.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Should I?
Someone's asking in the chat.
I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, I see it. b.kelmar@d3, spell the number 3 out.org.
Correct.
I see it now. Christine, if you could drop it in the chat again for him, please.
I will.
Are we turning it over now to Amy?
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Amy Trail. I am an educational advocate, but bigger than that. I'm a parent of, actually, he's going to be 21 in July. Hard to believe. He has level 3 autism. He's nonverbal, epilepsy, pretty severe, and intellectual disability. He's nonverbal, but a great communicator. I tell everybody that because he rocks his device. You know, I want to piggyback a little bit what Brian was saying before we go any further. All the laws, like he was talking about, that apply to the children, they do apply in the schools. But I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of the schools don't know that. I literally go into schools and have to bring this up. We have to reiterate the laws. What Brian is telling you is true. When something passes, you know, I keep a running list. So when people call, I'm able to look up that law right there in front of me because these things impact our children. I'm actually in Northern Virginia tonight because of a phone call 15 days ago where another advocate called me in with a parent who had a kindergartner, and the police were at her home for a behavior that happened during the school day. So I didn't know much about what was going on other than in the middle of the conversation and then communicating with the police officer. He told me that there had been an incident in the school with a little Tykes play knife from the kitchen center in kindergarten, and that he was playing with it, and stabbing and slashing was the words he used, but there was no contact between the children. He was making motions maybe behind the back, but the officer was telling the parent that he was there because there had been an assault of a kindergartner. I was shocked. All right. Very, very shocked, to the point that I'm here in Northern Virginia because I attended a meeting yesterday for this young child and another one tomorrow. Many things that came out during this situation are the things we talked about when I presented the last time I did this, was on the memos of understandings between the police departments, the sheriff's office, and the school divisions. I even spoke to the police officer that evening on the phone about the memo of understanding. And that's just an agreement of what the duties of the SRO is going to be while we're in the school building, and vice versa. So it's both sides, what the school's responsibility is, but also the sheriff's department. I did ask him if there was a memo of understanding between those parties, and he knew there was. And I said, this is a child with a disability, like we're talking about today, right? This is a young man that has developmental delays. He doesn't understand. He struggles with pretend play. These are all areas that he struggles with. And the police officer said, it doesn't matter. An assault is an assault. And we have a 0 tolerance rule that they had made contact with, I believe, the assistant superintendent who was aware. They did a threat assessment on a kindergartner with a plastic little Tykes knife. And developmentally, socially, he may be 2. And I'm being generous because he is very delayed. He has a lot of behaviors. And his communication is severely delayed. The other thing that I found out from that police officer is he had questioned this kindergartner already at the school before he came to the house. So they had pulled a kindergartner, questioned him, very similar to what Brian was sharing, that echolalia. You know, you say, did you stab at Johnny? And he repeated back. Well, he said no first. He was like, no, I did not do that. And then it goes on in the police report to say, I asked him again later in the conversation, and he admitted to it. So you heard me right. There is a police report now on this incident with this kindergartner. And it is all because of the IEP, the individual education plan, not meeting his needs. So we attended a meeting about this incident and the behavior. It was what, about 10 days ago. We discussed all of the things we're talking about today. You know, I talked about how we do not put kindergartners in the state of Virginia on the pipeline to prison, which is exactly what they were doing, you know, and everybody on this team looked shocked that I had a problem with this action. So it is a big problem. I need everybody to understand it is not when they're adults. I go in so frequently for kindergartners, first graders. We're building criminal records at the tender age of 5. And I'm down here in person because on top of the young man having a disability, his parents do. They don't quite understand what's all going on. They really don't have the capability to know if the district has offered an appropriate plan. So me and another advocate friend of mine, we both came to this part of the state to try to assist this family and to save this child, because I too, I have grandchildren. I have a 7-year-old grandchild. It has devastated me. This is a little tiny boy. He could not hurt anyone, you know? But yet now we have a criminal record. When I had the conversation, what Brian was saying, I was hoping Mom had not opened the door, but by the time I was on the phone, that had already happened, because that's my advice as well. You have the right to remain silent, and you need to. Brian is right. You need to remain silent. You need to contact an attorney. I did work for a short time for a special education attorney. You need to be counseled before you have those conversations, because what we're here doing over the course of these next couple of days is we're cleaning up basically what everybody said around those incidents. What the family said, what the child has said. It's been documented now in a police report, a threat assessment, a disciplinary record. He's going to carry that the rest of his life. There was a manifestation of his disability hearing twice, and they said, no, it's not a manifestation. But of course it is. Right? Of course it is. We know that because he has communication, issues. He has expressive and receptive language delays. And I tried to talk to the officer about it, thinking I could squash it there. And you can read it in the police report that he even said, I brought up that he had a disability. I tried all of those things, trying to not get him to write that report. But he told me that the school had agreed for him to come out, and it was considered an assault. But guys, it wasn't. There was no contact between the children. So now I have a police report that started off saying he was stabbing or slashing at a child, and it somehow got turned around into now he assaulted without any contact. It's happening in our schools a lot. It is. It's a lot. The memos of understanding, we did pull the memo of understanding between the police department and the school division here. And there is no allowances made in their policies for disabilities. In the summer of, I think it was July of 2022, the Office of Civil Rights released a guidance document about disability-based behavior to keep from going through these discriminatory kind of practices. They were warning the school divisions to look at their policies and make sure they're making allowances that keep from discriminatory practice. This is a discriminatory practice. This is what they're referring to. Referring this kindergartner to law enforcement is a discriminatory practice for a disability-based behavior. But it's not isolated. It's just another one that we're hoping to clean up. But why is it happening? People ask me that. As an advocate, why is that happening? Because the IEP is not meeting his needs. He does not have enough supports in his IEP, so his behaviors are escalating, and they escalate without the supports. And then when they escalate to a level, then we're going to bring in the SRO on him in kindergarten, and we're going to write a police report. That should not be happening. It should not. So he's disciplined by the school for his behavior. He's suspended. He has a manifestation hearing and a police report over a Little Tikes Play Center plastic knife that's round. I don't know if any of you have seen them. They're rounded. They could not cut anything. Like you could not even spread jam probably with them. But yes, zero tolerance policies are discriminatory. Let me say that again. If whenever a district says we take a zero tolerance policy, then that would be discriminatory, because a one size fits all approach cannot be used with developmental delays, people with autism. We have to have exceptions. And like Brian was talking about, other means of teaching the skills. When somebody has a deficit and they don't understand, he wasn't trying to stab anybody. Matter of fact, now that we've broke the case down and actually looked further in, his little statement said him and Johnny had been playing on the playground outside, pretend lasers 10 minutes before they came in. And then when he got in the classroom, he was trying to continue the little game of playing lasers. And Johnny didn't want to play, so he went over to get something to try to engage the play, to do pretend play a little more. There was no violence involved. So they've taken inappropriate pretend play and turned it into assault. And I wished I could say it was isolated, but it's not. I deal with this frequently. Best thing to do, I talked to everybody previous about trying to pull these memos of understanding. After this incident, it woke me up. If I cannot find somebody from each school division, I will be taking this task on myself. I will go school division to school division to reconcile their memos of understanding to protect these small kids. I mean, we shouldn't be doing this. Think about this little guy. He doesn't even know what a police record is, but he has one. He has one. And yes, Christina, I did report it to the Virginia Department of Education. Yes, I did. Because it was a systemic issue, and I need somebody to take a look at it. It's not just the police involvement in this situation. It's that all the things led to it. The things that the behavior had been going on all year, but we didn't add supports in place. There were all kinds of opportunities to do things, to be preventative, and nothing happened, and then he's the one being blamed for his needs not being met. It's just wrong. So yes, I do attend IEP meetings, like Catherine said at the beginning, because I've had police involvement with my own child, and I'm going to share that next. My guy is an escape artist. He can figure out any lock. He can figure out any code. He's got a good memory. So he has eloped our house before, and he loves strawberry icing. So he has eloped our house to go to the food line to try to access strawberry icing, which he has actually got his hands on. In the middle of the night at 3 a.m. with no clothes on. Very autistic. I want to reiterate, huge sensory issues, right? And I share that because there was police involvement. Nobody accused him of a crime. They could tell how developmentally delayed he was and nonverbal. There was the food line. They were very understanding. It could have went way different because he was out of my sight. Nobody there to speak for him. Police involvement. All of the things that, as a parent, is my worst nightmare. But thank goodness that they knew, they could tell that he didn't understand what was going on, and I was shortly there behind them. But it is scary. Even then, when I knew he had no intent of breaking into the food line, he did. Right? That's why I shared that story. He did. He just shimmied the door open enough to shimmy his body through, got in the food line at 3 a.m. Now, he only took all the strawberry icing though, nothing else, just strawberry icing. And yes, we can laugh about it now, but it was scary. I had no idea where he was. We're off a main road. And again, if somebody had called the police and said there's a naked man running to the food line, because he is 6 foot tall and 240 pounds. He's not a little guy anymore. So, like Brian was saying, I have a high chance of police involvement. He also has epilepsy. So we have rescue and police that come to our house because of that. He can get aggressive even after a seizure, right? So we run the risk of police involvement. I've had hospital security involved, right? When he's had a behavior in the hospital. Having the supports in place and knowing who to call is key to all parents. Yes, knowing the laws are great, but I tell parents too, you need a little phone tree of your own, who to call an emergency. Brian needs to be on the top of your list, right? And I'll give you my email address too. If they're in the school and they're young, you can contact me or my friend Heather, who's sitting behind me. She'll be glad to help as well. Because she has a child that too has autism, and he has been injured in a Virginia school. So she understands restraint seclusion very well from that aspect. But the laws are critical and they're helpful. I did want to add one thing, Brian. I am seeing them beginning to ask about the, is it SHARE? Is that the acronym? I see districts in Southwest Virginia in my area have added it in the area of special considerations, and they're beginning to actually have meaningful conversations. When I first saw it, there wasn't any, but I think some of them are beginning to understand it. I, as an advocate, maybe didn't understand it as well as I should, because I'm going to go back now and think about some of the inappropriate touching, like you were talking about earlier, some things that we could even add goals, in that area that they can learn the skills they're lacking. The main thing is, my advice is your IEP needs to be a complete picture of your child. A complete picture of your child. My IEP, it talks all about Noah, all the things, the behaviors we've seen, but also the great, what his communication strengths are. But it also says, things that we need to use to de-escalate. So everybody has that, not just, expecting whoever to come in to know how to de-escalate him. We have a de-escalation plan. And I have one even taped on the inside of my door in case he ever gets, escalated when the rescue is there or when the police are there. I'll just say his de-escalation plan is by the door. If you'll grab it, then they have something to visually read while I'm doing whatever I'm doing, which might look strange to some people because he's way bigger than I. But having it written down actually helps everybody understand what you're doing too. Same thing with the school. If we have a child that's escalating, I do not just ask for a behavior intervention plan. I ask for that de-escalation plan, solid for that child. That way we know what de-escalates him. My guy, it's things that are OCD, Connect 4, things that we draw with, things. So anything on like that will help de-escalate my guy, right? When he gets upset. So whatever it is that's key to your child should be in their de-escalation plan. Don't leave it up to the school to decide how to de-escalate because they don't know really how to de-escalate your child. That's what I tell people. Until you share it with them, they probably do not know entirely. They may know a couple of things that work for them in that setting, but the things that work at home are more likely to work at school because the child's already familiar with them, right? They're working for you in the home. So make sure you have de-escalation plans. But also, I'm going to say it again, what Brian said, remain silent, seek advice before you speak. You can, I do free consultations for everybody. Anybody can call me. Well, actually, you'll have to email me to find me half the time, but drop me an email. We can set up an appointment for a 30-minute consultation. I do those for anybody across the country. If you're in a bind and you just need a little advice, you can reach out to people. It's not just myself or Brian. Heather's an advocate. Most advocates will give free consultations. Always seek advice. And the other thing is, please, if you have a young child, add the accommodation that they're not questioned unless the parent is present, especially if they have behavior. And then that way we already know the parent. We're going to call the parent first. That the way the parent is going to be there. I'm adding that to that little guy's IEP tomorrow. So they cannot question him again because his story got convoluted, because he didn't have a parent present. All right.
So you guys still have some time, and I'm a little overwhelmed.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Would you like to talk about it? I will.
No, I'm just overwhelmed at the case studies that continue to be shared and the unfair treatment. I guess, Amy, I have a question for you. I'm just curious, and I want, Christine, if we could open the floor for questions, or if there are some parents on the line who really want to follow up on a question for Brian or Amy or for Nikki or Catherine. But I'm just curious, who made the call? The teacher in the kindergarten class who made that determination that the child was? How did that come about?
Sorry.
And I am simply overwhelmed because our constituency, people with disabilities, and the parents have so many challenges that they're fighting in the public school system. And so now we are now dealing with all of this craziness at a whole nother level.
And I think, in my opinion, it's worse.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this last year, it's been worse. The short-staffed, there's lots of reasons probably that it's going on, but there's no excuses for it. What happened was the behavior was in the classroom. She saw, like I was explaining, the little Tykes knife. She called for admin support, which meant people from the office coming. And her statement, she's the one that said he was slashing at or attempting to stab Johnny. All right. That was her word on her daily sheet that she did. And by the way, she calls that positive behavior intervention, but it's not, of
So
course.
it wasn't, so it wasn't the teacher, it was the behavioral specialist.
No, it was the kindergarten teacher.
Oh, it was the teacher. I missed it. Okay.
It was the kindergarten teacher that called admin, which is the principal. So the principal then came in, and then I guess the way it looks on paper is that the teacher shared with the principal what had happened. They pulled him out of class. They pulled in the school counselor, and they did a threat assessment on this little child. And it came back it came back low threat. If you're familiar with the threat assessment, it came back low threat. Well, I'm not quite sure how it could be anything other, considering it was plastic and a little Tykes, and there was no contact. So, but it came back low threat. But somehow the principal still gave it to the SRO to pay him a visit. Now, this was the other interesting thing during that interaction, me and the police officer that night, because we had a pretty long conversation. I was trying to talk him out of that police report. I asked him was he there as an official police officer in his role as a police officer? He said yes, that he was informed but he's always a police officer is what he told me. So when somebody in the building, the principal, informed him of an assault, it was his duty to uphold the law and come out and speak with the parent about the assault.
But they're not reporting it to OCR.
But they're not reporting this information to the Office of Civil Rights. We know that. We know they're not reporting. We looked up their figures. I seriously doubt they're going to turn that into what is officially captured as a police referral, but it was, right? And they're going to say he chose to pay him a visit. Well, no, that is a result of a behavior that happened at school. And the principal shared that information. And that's what it is. When the principal shared that information, the principal shared that there was an assault in the school, and then he had to do his officer duty, is how he explained it.
Let us, we have about 15 minutes. I want to open it. And, Virginia Board,
Sure.
we do these trainings so that our alumni and other disability partners and parents can really have access to experts like yourselves. And I just so very much appreciate you and Brian's openness at no cost to help these families. And so I see a hand. I can't pronounce the first name, Mr. Surio, maybe?
I believe
Yes,
it's Attila.
yes, this is Attila. I'm from George Mason University, and I'll be graduating in May, and I am pursuing a bachelor's degree in social work and a minor in sociology. So my question, well, this is for everyone, but my question is essentially like, what other policies needs to be in place, and what more needs to be done to protect individuals with autism and intellectual disabilities and mental health issues, to make sure like something like this situation doesn't happen again? Because me personally, I think this is it's disheartening to hear that something like this can happen to a kindergartner, someone who that is supposed to be protected by the system that is in place. And like I said in the comments, the system essentially failed this individual and their family, and it's unfortunate. But like my question again is what policies, what more needs to be done, moving forward in this regard? Thank you.
Brian, why don't you take that?
I'll take that one. Legislation. That's the answer. In fact, I want to take Amy's case offline and bring it to the local legislator and to the commissioner of DBHTS,
Thank you.
and to the special education teacher to raise this up. But the way the law is written and the way the police have, once the police is called and says there's an assault, their duty is not to de-escalate. Theirs is to, quote, keep everyone safe. So they're going to probably arrest I'm lucky he wasn't hauled off, but typically they would arrest that child. The law that was implemented a couple of years back that said if there is a serious crime that takes place on your at your school, you have to report it. And if you don't, the principal can be charged. So, and that's where we said there has to be an exception, and there is an exception for people with developmental disabilities in that law. Now, again, not everybody reads the law. But no, we need to tighten up the legislation to specifically address these situations. One of the couple bills that we're putting in next year, one is that we're trying to get diversion as early as possible, beginning from when they first have contact with law enforcement, and figure out ways that we can do diversion at the earliest interception with law enforcement. So that's some legislation, and I think I appreciate your guys' input and feedback of what do you think needs to be done, and I can work with you, or I can take that to legislation.
Hey, this is Catherine. I just want to add that another element to this, so that we can sort of start to make a difference in stemming the tide, is in cases like what Amy's talking about, and in many cases where we've got high school level and older folks that are getting tied up in the system. If they had the proper supports in their IEPs when they were younger, a lot of this would never escalate to that point. And so it does involve educating the parents, the educational administration, and the community at large, because it is all of our responsibilities to stop this. We don't want the prisons to turn into the institutions, which they already are, because I read a statistic. I might be misquoting this because I've read so much on the topic in the past few days, but there are many people that are in prison now that have ID or DD, and they should not be there. So if the kids were getting the supports that they needed earlier, and this could be turned around for the future. So there's work to be done on every level.
I agree.
Yep.
So we do have a couple of questions that have come into the chat. The first one is from Aletha Bethea. Do the parents have any legal recourse they can take against the school division and law enforcement?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I talked to Nikki about this when this happened to her son. You're a civil rights violation. They did not take into account and nor do the things that Nikki had in his IEP. They were supposed to be watching him. They were supposed to be there when those situations occur, and they were not. And going after them, I mean, it's hard. And the civil rights was stronger a few months ago, maybe not as strong now. But you were able to file a complaint, and you still can file an ADA complaint. And I suggest that they do that because that still gets their attention. And then the school finds out that they have an ADA violation complaint being filed against them. That's an issue. And just the initial discussions of we are considering a lawsuit. These schools have had these lawsuits. A lot of cases that you've seen in the news. Unfortunately, I think it's half of the people that were killed by police were autistic. So there's been a lot of lawsuits, and the lawsuits are money, and these counties don't have money, and that gets their attention to drop charges. And we'll work with Amy on trying to reach out to them of trying to push back on the school, because the school should have been the one that de-escalated that situation. The school should have taken this into account, that this person has an IEP, that this person has developmental disabilities, and they did
Oh, yeah.
not.
They did not. There's also something called an administrative review, and we're going to ask for that from the police department. Their policy isn't as black and white as the police officer told us, let's say it was. And there was some room that he did not have to file that. So I'm going to ask that another officer within the department review the incident and him filing the report with the information he had to see if that's in line with their policy. Now, it too sounds like jumping through a lot of hoops, but it can actually change the system internally. It could come back after an administrative review. If it was found to be kind of against the policy, then they'll order additional training for the officers that are assigned. We can ask for more training when an administrative review comes out that they didn't act in line with their policy. We can even do that with the school division. If the school division has a policy and we feel like a principal didn't follow the policy correctly, we can ask them, because it's an internal kind of review. And a lot of people think it won't give you much information, but yet it does. It really, really does, because they will pull the policy information. They will pull a lot of pertinent information that you're going to need if you end up filing a complaint. And when I file a complaint, if I have already filed an administrative review, Brian, I will take the administrative review and send it along with my complaint. So it shows that they even kind of were smacked on the hand by their own department, kind of already showing that they agree that it was not in line with their policy.
And Brian, to your point, yes, you did advise me to move forward and take legal action, but you also put me in contact with the state attorney general for the Eastern District, who was over the Office of Civil Rights, and I followed up with him, talked to him personally, and he said it was on his radar, and to let him know what the schools were going to do. And long story short, all I asked for was, well, one, the MDR, but I also asked for the school to at least provide my son with an aide, someone who could walk with him from one class to the next. And they immediately said, no, we can't do that. We can't provide you with those services. Well, under IDEA, per his IEP, schools are supposed to provide those services. And if they can't, it is on them to use the resources to make sure that my son gets the services he needs. So that's why I was able to find another school for him to go to. And the school district ended up paying that tuition. They seemed to change their tune when I mentioned to them in the IEP meeting, oh, by the way, the state's attorney general is aware of this situation, and again, this is all talking, having those resources, talking to you, Brian, like Amy was saying, have your phone tree, have your email tree, make sure these folks, on this panel are part of that, your contact, okay, because you have to educate yourself. I know we shared a lot of information, You go back to what was shared here, because now you have the information. Like Maya Angelou would say, you do the best you can until you know better. Now that you know better, you do better.
Thank you for that. We did have another question in the chat that I believe Brian answered, but the question was regarding police training focusing on mental illness only and not developmental disabilities. A few years ago, a young autistic man in Virginia Beach was in a car accident that seriously injured another man. He was charged and with attempted murder because of police officers believe the autistic man was attempting suicide in the accident. Do you think this lack of police training on developmental disabilities led to this?
And the reason I said probably not, I'm very, very familiar with the case. I know him personally, and I know his mother personally, and she's worked with me on legislation as well. In that case, it was echolalia. So the police officer said, or not the police officer, one of the individuals said, "What are you, crazy? Are you trying to kill us?" And he repeated back exactly what he said, and they arrested him, saying that he was attempting suicide and attempting murder because he said that. So would the officer had enough training? As I tell people, law enforcement, they're just one part of the puzzle, and you can teach them. But even if you give them 50 hours, 100 hours, 1,000 hours, they're not going to be as trained as, an ABA or psychologists that are trained on this and work with this every day. So they'll understand the help that getting the training for law enforcement helps them understand to ask the question, something's not right. I need to get more help. That's kind of the thing, is for them to recognize the situation, for them to figure out what's going on. Unfortunately, they don't have that kind of training, enough training, and that's where they would reach out to, these crisis interventions or 988 to say, hey, this kid's saying something that's crazy, we need some help.
Thank you very much, Dr. Penny. That's all the questions that we have in the chat.
I think I saw Michael Willon. Michael had his hand up.
Dr. Penny, how are you this evening? Yeah, just a couple quick things. Dr. Dowd mentioned about her, getting her child, moving from class to class, getting a one-on-one. I spent almost 8 years getting a one-on-one from my youngest son. After two, it took, 2 mediations and constant pressure to say, yes, you can do that. Yes, you can do that. And so I think that one thing, when parents know those kinds of things, and you were saying you came into the meeting somewhat prepared, but it's always, there's always more things you can learn, as an educator. The other thing, going back to what Amy was talking about with the kindergarten student, that's, to me, is appalling. Developmentally, a kindergarten student is going to do things like that. And at a teachable moment, that's when the kindergarten teacher can take the kid aside and say, here's what this, that's inappropriate, that's wrong. And let's work on this, instead of doing a referral. That's jumping the gun in such a huge, it's a leap, and that just really, really surprised and disappoints me as well as an educator as well. And so to that effect, I guess that it's also the professional development of our teachers that is so critical, that I would think a kindergarten teacher would know that intuitively that those kind of things are going to happen. Kids are going to say things, do things, act out, and that's when the learning takes place, especially at that level. And it's just amazing to me that would go to and even the principal had taken that up, and they had to get a counselor talk to the student. The principal could talk to the student. To make that a referral for, to have an SRO, it just seems so inappropriate and so far ahead.
I'll add to it that there had been behavior every day since the beginning of school year. I have 17 pages. I typed everything out in a graph. So they had been complaining about his behavior since day one, very negatively. But what they did is every time they would complain about it, kind of like you were just talking about, they didn't have a meeting to go, hey, he needs a one-on-one aid. Hey, he needs some more services. Let's write some goals. No, none of that happened.
Counseling, interventions. There's so many things you can do. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that's where the PD is so important, I think.
They kept suspending him. He literally, and I'm not exaggerating, we've added up the missed educational time. He spent more time out of the classroom this year than he did in it.
And
Like,
having kindergarten kid out of the classroom, what does that do for the child's education? I mean, all those kinds of things just it exacerbates the situation and makes it worse instead of better.
right, it does. And he's not learning how to learn, because that's really what you go to kindergarten for. You're going to kindergarten to learn how to be a learner, how to sit in our seat, how to participate. What it is he never got a chance to learn because he was busy in the principal's office all year. So yes, I got a problem with the principal all of a sudden that one day. I don't know what happened, Michael. Was it an accumulation of dealing with him all year and then somebody snapped that morning? Because it feels like that. There was no other threat assessment all year long. And to be honest, he had done things that could have been misinterpreted way easier than this. So, and some dangerous things, running out of the classroom. So the child's got a lot of behavior. What they never did was convene a team all year long to discuss any additional supports. Instead, we kept looking at him like he's a behavioral issue and he's got all this bad behavior. And then we're going to show up at the parent's house, basically making them feel like bad parents when they have a child with a disability. And I kept saying that to the police officer. Like, he's like, oh yeah, I know him. Called him by name. I see him every day at school. I just had to come here and tell him how wrong. And I come to find out he had questioned him already at school too, in the SRO capacity, and then comes to his house and questions him in a police. Come on. You can't do that to little kids. And yes, a kid's story is going to change. Michael, like Michael was saying, they're little, they're learning to recall. So yeah, his story changed. At first he said he didn't do it. And then at his home, he said he did. But here's what everybody needs to know. He wanted to go, in my opinion, go play in the police car and turn the blue lights on, which he got to do after we filled him out a police report. The police officer did him a favor and let him play with the lights. I find that disgusting.
Totally agree.
It was disgusting. That is not positive reinforcement, and that is not a way to teach an individual with a disability to go to a police officer when you're in danger. You're scarring that relationship before we ever build it.
And reinforce the negative behavior, because then the child thinks, oh, if I do that, I get to go play with the lights again. So it's ridiculous.
I know. That's what I'm.
Excuse me, Amy. There's a comment from Cheryl Lloyd, one of our alumni from Southwest. Can you read that for us, Christine?
Yes, I was getting to that. That just as an FYI, she has taken proactive measures regarding law enforcement by displaying a decal that states that an individual with autism spectrum disorder or intellectual or developmental disabilities lives here or is an occupant of this vehicle.
Yeah. And when I go on trips, like my child goes to UVA quite frequently. I had shirts made that on the front's got the medical alert, like the little emblem. On the back, it's got the alert as well. And it says nonverbal autism, epilepsy. It's got it across his back. So if there's no misunderstandings, in case they do see something, there's a lot of campus police at UVA. When we go in, if my guy's the bolt and I'm taking off after him, I want everybody to know what's going on so I don't have to debrief everybody. So anything like that. He also has a medical ID bracelet, but he might take that off. The shirt he'll leave on, so somebody will at least be able to know. So anything like that to identify is a good idea.
The other thing
Are there any final questions from any of the members in the room? I want to shout out to our alumni that I see, some whom I have not seen in a long time. So happy to see you here. Yukiko Dove, Angel Barnhill, Cheryl Lloyd, Alexandra Dixon, Kishara White, it's good to see you. Darlene Kelly, Christina Lloyd, Michael Willan, of course, Catherine Childers and Nikki, of course, Olitha Bethea, Isis. It's really good to see all of you. I just want to make sure I'm going to turn it over to our executive director, Terry, who's been in the room with us, and she may have some comments she'd like to share. But just welcome to all of our alumni and all of the others who have attended this session. I think the team has done a phenomenal job. And what I appreciate about this style and this format is that they break it down and give us living, breathing cases that have actually helped. And then they give us the strategies and recommendations on how we should respond. And I saw lots of positive chat responses about how great the session was. And so I just want to thank the presenters. This is a tough subject. And as somebody said earlier, it's worse than it's ever been. Terry, I'll yield to you. Thank you as always for being here and all your support.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. And, you know, we know these things happen, but, just this deep reminder of hearing your stories is so powerful, and really makes a difference. So, I just commend you all for the work that you're doing. It's hard work. It's not easy work, not just, retelling your own experiences, but your support for other families, other parents, other children, what you give of yourself to do that, day in and day out and making yourself available. I just can't, thank you enough. And, I also, on the positive side, want to congratulate you on your successes. Brian, you've been a real leader here with our own General Assembly and the work that you've done educating legislators and making a difference. It really is making a difference. And it's, I don't even have words just to say, how grateful I am that you are here in Virginia, but you're also working, nationally. You're really trying to, make a change for people with developmental disabilities all over the country. And it's such an important change that needs to be made. And we always have to worry about backsliding, especially in times like today. We've had many, positive things, over the years. We've seen some positive change, and we can't just rest on that, because I think the fight is more important today than ever. And you all are just our warriors and heroes. So thank you. I know that we often get many hundreds of views of these sessions on Facebook, and I think that this is going to be shared widely, because it is just so important. And I agree with Penny that the tempo that you arrange this, with really practical, good, important advice, on the heels of really, important stories, real stories, not real stories, is just sets, it's a really incredible learning tool, the way, you all do this. So thank you. We are here for you, and thank you everybody who's joined us tonight. Dr. Penny and Christine, Kelly, all of you who have organized this, the alumni who are here and who also said we need to share more about this issue to the disability community. So thank you.
We're going to put our session feedback form up. Thank you, Christine. Right on time. We really don't want you to leave without giving us some feedback about this session. I believe that all of the presenters put their contact information in the chat. And I'm just amazed at Amy and Brian, who says, you can have my number, just call me, because they are busy, busy, busy. I don't know how we can clone, or if you guys are even trying to clone others to do what you do. Are you, Brian?
We are.
Good.
We are. I am too. I'm mentoring quite a few. I'm trying to pull out some others as well.
Awesome. Awesome. There are two, Christine is putting that up for me as well. Thank you, Christian. I was like, a slide coming up. So in my introduction, I shared with you that this was our 7th for this state year that started in August 2024. And we will conclude our final session, our 8th session, on April the 11th. We hope that all of you will register for that session. It is on supportive decision-making, protecting rights, ensuring choices, and aging caregivers. We have expert presenters who will be sharing with us on that evening, on that afternoon. It is Friday, April the 11th, and it's from 12 noon to 2 p.m. As Terry alluded, our director or manager of communications and information, communications information manager for Virginia Board is my colleague, Anita Ayers. And Anita is not only live streaming on Facebook for us tonight, but we're also recording the session. And I want to shout out to the phenomenal work that she and her team does to help us market these sessions. All of our sessions, as Terry alluded, are viewed hundreds of times, either through Facebook, or folks are asking for the recordings, or they are actually coming to the session. For this session, there were 125 persons that were registered tonight. And we constantly say, we know that the topic is not only provocative, but it's necessary, it's needed. Our alumni say, as Terry said, we want to hear more about it. And so the work that our alumni, the training alumni does, we're getting ready for a May 31st retreat, virtual retreat. And so I need all of you in the room tonight. We're going to be sending you, again, we already received a save the date, but we're going to be sending you more information and details about it. But on that Saturday, 31 May, which is not Memorial Day, it's following Memorial Day, we hope that you will come, because that is where we will do our work, alumni, on what are the topics. I hear you, Aletha. What are the topics and other issues and concerns that you would like Virginia Board to consider offering in our new state year that begins July 1, 2025, and will run through April 2026. And so I'm sending that appeal out to you. And then I wanted to also share that our PIP, Partners in Policy Making registration recruitment process, ended on last Friday. We're very happy to have a very competitive group of persons who have applied. We now have the Youth Leadership Academy that is going to be closing on March the 28th. So there's about 2 weeks, give or take, a little less time left. If you have someone in your family, in your community, in your church that has a youth in the public school system, in the 10th grade through 12th grade, and you would like them to experience an all-expense-paid experience at Virginia State University, hosted by Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, a 4-day experience that will begin on Monday, July the 14th, and we will conclude with graduation on that Thursday, July the 17th. I encourage all of you, and especially our alumni, to please, we need a few more, just a few more applications for the Youth Leadership Academy. And we would appreciate if you could assist in getting the application to them. I'm going to ask Christine all of the names of the alumni that we have called tonight. We will send again a quick email tomorrow morning with access to the application. And there are 2 letters of recommendations that are needed. So alumni can write recommendations as well. And any of our other disability partners who are here tonight, and you have someone that you'd like to recommend, we encourage you to please help them apply and meet our deadline, which is March the 28th. And having said that, I think it is 7:54 on a Wednesday night. And I think we can call it a wrap. It's been a wonderful session. It's been an emotional session. It's been very educational. It's inspiring. I saw Mr. Surreal say, I feel hopeful. And we leave on that statement that no matter how bleak it looks and how challenging times are, we still find good and we still believe that things can get better. I think Terry would join me in saying that in this climate that we're currently in, whatever advocacy that you can do, however you can reach out to your legislators, write letters, send emails, make calls on those issues that are concerning to you, we encourage you to do that. Because our voices still matter, and together, collectively, we can still make a difference. And so don't give up, keep hope alive, and have a good evening.